On a blizzard night in Flagstaff, a former Navy SEAL thought he was just driving home. Then two tiny puppies stepped into his headlights and refused to move. Luke Harper slammed the brakes, jumped out into the knife-cold wind, and his heart dropped. The puppies were shaking so hard they could barely stand. But the terrifying part was this: the puppies were not lost. The puppies were leading Luke's German Shepherd, Ranger, locked onto a fresh drag mark in the snow, a trail that vanished into the trees like a warning. Luke followed it and found something chained in the darkness. Then a truck rolled past, slow and heavy, and the side panel flashed one clean logo through the storm: Mallory K9 Training. If you want to see what Luke uncovered and how this rescue turned into a fight for justice, share this story. Comment what Luke should do next, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Break time Zarwo. Two shadows on white road. Snow fell in heavy, patient sheets over Flagstaff, erasing tire tracks as quickly as they appeared. Wind slid between the pines like a low whistle. The world looked clean, but it did not feel kind. Luke Harper kept both hands on the wheel and drove like the road was a living thing that could bite. The cab heater worked hard, yet the cold still found ways in, sneaking through seams and old memories. He was around 40, tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who had once carried too much weight and refused to complain. His face was all hard lines, square jaw, straight nose, a slightly high forehead that made his stare look even more direct. A neatly trimmed beard held a few gray threads at his temples. In calmer moments, his dark brown eyes could be warm. Tonight they were sharp, scanning the black glass of the road. His left knee ached the way it always did when the weather turned. It made his body feel a half-beat behind his mind, like an old hinge that needed oil. Over his red and black plaid flannel, he wore a navy winter coat that fell to mid-thigh. Faded jeans and brown, low-cut leather boots completed the uniform he never seemed to change. Not because he was trying to look tough, but because simple was easier. Simple meant fewer choices. Fewer choices meant fewer mistakes. In the back seat, Ranger lay with his head up. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, black and tan with a dark saddle across his back, tan legs, and a tan mask that softened the seriousness of his face. His ears stood tall, always listening, always sorting the world into harmless and not. His amber-brown eyes were intelligent without being needy. He did not bark to fill silence. He only spoke when it mattered. Ranger was a service dog in the truest sense, trained to steady Luke when pain or old panic tried to drag him under. He did it without drama, without noise, like a quiet hand on the shoulder. Luke was almost at the last curve before the cabin road when Ranger's posture changed. Not a jump, not a sound, just a tension through his spine. As if the air had shifted, Luke eased off the gas. His headlights caught something small in the beam. Then another, two shapes, low to the ground, wobbling in the middle of the lane like the road had grown two lumps of living shadow. Luke's foot hit the brake. The truck slid a few inches, tires whispering against packed snow, and stopped with the bumper a breath away from the first shape. Puppies. Two of them, tiny, shivering so hard, their bodies looked like they might shake apart. Their fur was damp and clumped with ice. Their paws splayed on the frozen surface, as if they had forgotten what warmth felt like. Luke stared for a second too long. It was not because he didn't know what to do. It was because his chest did something sudden and sharp, like it didn't recognize itself. In his line of work, his old work, he had learned to file away, feeling you could do your job or you could fall apart. You couldn't do both. But these two little animals were not part of any battlefield. They were just small, lost, cold. They did not run from the lights. They stood there, blocking the truck like they had chosen this moment, this vehicle, this man. Luke cracked the door. The wind punched in with a slap of snow. Ranger slid forward, but waited. Luke's voice came out low and steady. Stay. Ranger stayed, but his eyes tracked Luke's movement with a focused calm. Luke stepped down. His boots hit the snow with a dull crunch. He moved carefully, not because he feared the pups, but because he feared the wrong kind of surprise. His knee protested with a hot pinch, and he ignored it. Up close, the puppies looked worse. One had a pale patch on its muzzle, the fur rubbed thin, as if it had been scraped. The other's ears drooped, heavy with ice. Their eyes were wide, not bright with curiosity, but dull with exhaustion. Their bellies looked too small for their bodies. Luke knelt slowly. The snow soaked through the knees of his jeans. He held out a gloved hand. "Hey," he said, like the word could be a blanket. "Hey, little ones." The puppy with the scraped muzzle tried to step forward, then slipped. Its legs trembled so hard it could barely stay upright. Luke felt something in his throat tighten. Anger, maybe, or grief, or a bitter mix of both. He scooped that puppy up first. It was lighter than it should have been. A handful of bones and trembling warmth. The pup didn't struggle. It simply pressed into his glove like it had run out of choices. The second puppy made a weak, stubborn sound, half whine, half complaint, as if offended by being ignored. Luke almost smiled despite himself. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see you too." He picked up the second one. It immediately tried to mouth his glove, a tiny defiant bite with no strength behind it. Luke huffed a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Tough guy." He stood, careful with his knee, and turned toward the truck. Ranger was already at the open door, silent, watching Luke's hands, watching the road, watching the dark. His ears pivoted once, then froze. Luke placed the puppies on the passenger seat and pulled the navy coat open just enough to cover them. They burrowed into the fabric like it was the first merciful thing they'd ever known. Ranger hopped into the back and did not lie down. He stayed upright, head angled toward the windshield. Eyes fixed on the road Luke had just driven. Luke slid into the driver's seat. He turned the heat higher. The air blew warm, but it would take time. Time the puppies didn't have. "Okay," Luke said quietly, more to himself than anyone. "We'll get you warm. Then we'll figure out where you came from." He put the truck in gear. Ranger did not relax. Luke drove 10 seconds, maybe 15, before Ranger gave the signal. No bark, no growl, just a single, deliberate shift forward and a steady stare out the side window. Body angled as if pointing. Luke's hands tightened on the wheel. He slowed, then stopped. "What is it?" he asked. Ranger's eyes didn't leave the darkness. Luke followed the line of that stare. At first, he saw nothing but snow and trees. Then the headlights caught something faint on the shoulder, a pattern that didn't match the rest of the storm's clean cover. A drag mark. Not a tire track, not deer prints. A narrow, uneven line in the snow, as if something had been pulled, fought, scraped along the ground. Luke's chest went cold in a different way. He leaned forward, squinting, then opened the door again. The wind rushed in like it had been waiting. He stepped down and limped around the front of the truck, letting his knee complain. He crouched, close to the snow, and studied the mark. It was fresh, and it led back the way he came. Luke looked at the puppies, curled under his coat, their bodies trembling less now, but still too weak. He looked at Ranger, who stood alert, quiet as stone. Luke swallowed once. This was supposed to be a simple drive home, a quiet night, a life kept small, but small things had a way of refusing to stay small. He climbed back into the truck and shut the door. Ranger sat, eyes still fixed, waiting for the decision. Luke turned the wheel. "We're going back," he said, voice flat with certainty. "Somebody left you out here for a reason." The truck eased into the snow-filled darkness, headlights cutting a path through white, while two tiny lives breathed under Luke's coat. And Ranger watched the road like a promise, a scent that didn't belong. The storm thickened, turning streetlights into blurred halos. Snow piled in soft dunes along the curbs, and the night carried that hollow quiet that made every small sound feel like a warning. Luke Harper drove back toward town with his jaw set. The red and black flannel beneath his navy winter coat felt damp at the collar from melted snow. His left knee throbbed whenever he shifted his foot from brake to gas, but he did not slow down. Pain was familiar. Helplessness was not. On the passenger seat, the two puppies were wrapped under the edge of his coat, breathing in shallow little bursts. Every now and then one of them made a tiny noise, more like a question than a cry. In the back seat, Ranger stayed upright. The German shepherd's black and tan coat looked almost black in the low light. Ears tall and steady, amber-brown eyes tracking the road. He was Luke's service dog, trained to read him when Luke wouldn't admit he was slipping. Tonight Ranger read something else too, something outside the truck. Luke kept seeing that drag mark in the snow. It wasn't the mark itself that bothered him. It was what it suggested. Someone had been here. Someone had done something, and hoped the storm would erase it. The animal clinic's sign glowed pale green against the snow. The parking lot was nearly empty. Luke carried the puppies inside, cradling them with a gentleness that felt strange on his arms, like he was holding something too pure for the world he remembered. A bell chimed as the door opened. A woman behind the counter looked up fast. She was in her early 30s, white, slim to average build, with light brown hair twisted into a messy bun that looked like it had been done with one hand. Freckles dusted the bridge of her nose. Her eyes were tired, but kind. The tiredness of someone who had spent too many nights trying to fix what other people broke. She stepped out from behind the counter at once. "Bring them here," she said, voice low but firm. Not panic, not softness that would get in the way. The kind of calm that knew what to do. Luke set the puppies on the exam table, keeping his hands close in case they slipped. The woman washed her hands, put on gloves, and moved with quick precision. "I'm Maya Collins," she said without looking away from the puppies. "You found them outside." "On the road," Luke answered. He kept his voice controlled. "They stopped my truck." Maya's mouth tightened. She checked their gums, listened to their breathing, felt the edges of their ribs with careful fingers. "They're cold and dehydrated," she said. "Hungry too." "That part's obvious." Luke watched her work and felt a tension building behind his sternum. He had seen medics in chaos, hands steady while the world screamed. Maya carried that same steadiness, just quieter. She lifted the first puppy's chin. Her expression changed. "These marks," she said. "Not from the cold." Luke leaned in. He did not touch, but he looked. There were small abrasions. Not fresh blood. Not anything graphic. Just the kind of damage that came from rough handling. From being shoved or dragged. From fear and hard surfaces. Maya's eyes flicked to Luke's face. "I don't like making assumptions," she said, choosing her words with care. "But I've seen this pattern recently." Luke felt his stomach drop. "How many?" Maya exhaled. "Enough that I started keeping notes. People call them strays. They say it's winter. They say nature is cruel, but this isn't nature." Luke's hands curled once, then relaxed. He forced them open on the edge of the table. He could feel Ranger behind him. Silent, present, watching the room and watching Luke. Maya warmed a towel, wrapped it around the smaller puppy, and gave it a few drops of water. The puppy swallowed like it had forgotten how. Luke's throat tightened. He hated that he felt relieved over something so small. "I'm not local," Luke said. "I don't want attention." Maya gave him a quick, assessing look. The navy coat, the flannel, the stiff way he carried his left leg. "You don't look like someone who chases attention," she said. "You look like someone who walks away from it." Luke didn't answer. Maya set up a heating pad under a blanket and placed both puppies together. They pressed into each other without thinking, like they had always known warmth could only be shared. Maya softened for a moment, then her voice hardened again. "If you found them where you say you did," she said, "there might be others." Luke's mind went back to the drag mark, to the way Ranger had pointed. He nodded once. "I saw a trail." Maya paused, then opened a drawer and pulled out a small notepad. On the cover were scribbled names and dates. She didn't hand it to him, but she held it like proof she wasn't imagining things. "You're not the first person to walk in here carrying something half-frozen," she said. "Most people don't come back the way you did. They drop them off and leave because it hurts too much to look at the world that way." Luke stared at the puppies. "I can't do that." Maya studied him, then gave a slow nod. "Okay." She wrote down his name anyway when he offered it. Luke Harper. She didn't ask what he used to do. Something in her seemed to understand that some stories were carried, not shared. Outside, the wind slapped snow against the glass. Ranger's head lifted sharply. Maya noticed. "He's on duty," she said quietly. Luke glanced back at Ranger. The German shepherd's ears were rigid, his gaze locked toward the door, as if the night itself had stepped closer. Luke's chest tightened. "We need to go." Maya didn't argue. She packed a small bag, warming pads, a bottle, basic supplies. She spoke like someone giving orders to herself. Keep them warm, she said. Small sips. Don't overfeed. If they crash, bring them straight back. Luke nodded. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Thank you. Maya's expression softened again. Just bring them back alive. Luke carried the puppies out. Ranger followed at his heel, quiet as a shadow. The moment Luke set the puppies down in the cab and started the engine, Ranger shifted forward again, as if pulled by a thread only he could feel. Luke drove back toward the curve where he'd seen the trail, the storm still trying to wipe the world clean. He parked and stepped out. His knee protested with a sharp burn, but he used the pain like a compass. It kept him present. Ranger moved ahead into the trees. Not fast, not reckless, purposeful. Luke followed, scanning the snow for anything out of place. The drag mark was there, faint but real. It led off the road, down a narrow slope between pines, toward a patch of darkness that didn't belong. Then Luke heard it, a low, broken sound, not loud enough to draw attention, too tired to be a threat. The sound of something trying not to die. Luke pushed through a curtain of branches and found a small lean-to of corrugated metal, half collapsed under snow. Beneath it, a medium-sized dog lay tethered to a post with a length of chain. She was not moving much. Her coat was dull with frost. Her eyes were open, watching, wary and protective even in weakness. Luke's chest tightened hard. He crouched slowly, speaking low. "It's okay," he said, though he didn't believe the world had earned those words. Ranger stood a step behind Luke, perfectly still, ears high, body angled between Luke and the deeper woods. Luke reached for the chain. His fingers were careful. The dog flinched, then stilled, as if deciding whether to trust him. Luke swallowed. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog's eyes flicked past him. Ranger froze. A beam of light swept through the trees. Luke didn't think. He moved on instinct, pulling back into shadow with the dog close. Ranger tight beside him. A truck rolled past the edge of the clearing, slow and heavy, tires crunching snow. On the side panel, as the headlights flashed over it, Luke saw a logo clear as a slap, Mallory K9 Training. The truck disappeared into the storm. Luke stayed still, breath held, the cold suddenly inside his bones. Then he looked down at the chained dog again, and he understood something simple and terrible. This was not an accident. This was a system, the place with two clean smiles. Morning arrived gray and sharp. Snow still fell, lighter now, like ash drifting from a distant fire. The town moved slowly under a white cover that made every building look innocent. Luke Harper did not feel innocent. He stood at the edge of a parking lot, his navy winter coat pulled tight over his red and black plaid flannel, faded jeans, brown low-cut leather boots, the same outfit as always, because routine kept his mind quiet. His left knee complained when he shifted his weight, a dull reminder that some things never fully healed. Ranger stayed close. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught snowflakes like tiny stars that vanished as quickly as they landed. Ears upright, amber-brown eyes scanning, calm, quiet, a service dog, trained to read Luke's breathing. His posture, the small tremors of old fear. Today, Ranger was reading the world more than Luke. Luke had left the puppies at the clinic with Maya's instructions ringing in his head. Keep them warm, small sips. Bring them back alive. He trusted her. He did not trust what he had seen in the woods. The name on the truck had been clean and bold, like a brand you were meant to respect. Mallory K9 Training. Luke drove there just before noon. The facility sat on the edge of town, framed by pines and fresh snow. The sign was polished. The parking area was plowed. A cheerful banner hung near the entrance with bright words about training, safety, and community. There were photos on the wall inside the lobby of smiling families, uniformed officers, and kids hugging dogs. It was the kind of place that begged you to relax. Luke did not relax. His eyes moved the way they always did when he entered a new space. Corners, exits, blind spots, the line of sight down the hallway, the way the cameras were positioned. Ranger's paws made almost no sound on the tile. A man stepped out to greet them, wide smile already in place. Trent Mallory looked like he belonged in those photos. Mid-40s. Tall. Built solid in a way that suggested gym time and careful meals. His hair was neatly groomed. His stubble was trimmed so perfectly it looked intentional, like part of an image. His jacket was expensive without shouting about it. Dark jeans. Clean boots. He had the kind of handshake people trusted. But his eyes were wrong. They were not cruel on the surface. They were simply empty of warmth, like a locked room with the lights on. "Well, look at that," Trent said, gaze dropping to Ranger. "Beautiful dog. That's a serious shepherd." Ranger did not bark. He did not growl. He just looked back, steady and unreadable. Luke kept his voice even. "Just checking the place out. I saw your name around town." Trent's smile widened. "We do a lot of work with families and law enforcement. Training, temperament, obedience. People want safe dogs. We give them that." Luke nodded once, like he was listening for value. "You handle rescues too." Trent spread his hands. "When we can. Winters are hard. Dogs get dumped. Folks call them strays. But you and I both know people can be worse than weather." The words sounded right. Too right. Luke felt something cold slide beneath his ribs. He had heard men talk like this before. Men who knew the correct shape of compassion, but not the weight of it. Ranger shifted half a step, not toward Trent, toward the hallway behind him. Luke followed Ranger's line of attention. Down that corridor, a door sat slightly ajar. There was no sound Luke could hear, nothing obvious. Still, Ranger's ears stayed locked. Trent noticed the glance and chuckled lightly. "He's alert. Good temperament. You train him yourself." "Enough," Luke said. Trent leaned in a fraction. "Friendly. If you ever want to sharpen him up, we can help. Even a good dog benefits from the right guidance." Luke stared at Trent's smile and thought of the chained mother dog under a collapsed sheet of metal, eyes open in the cold. He thought of the two puppies trembling in the road, blocking his truck like a warning. "Maybe," Luke said. Trent waved him farther into the lobby. "Come on, I'll show you the training rooms. We're proud of our setup." Luke walked, knee stiff, face controlled. Ranger moved with him, quiet, watching. They passed a wall covered in certificates, a shelf stacked with branded pamphlets, a donation box with a cheerful message. Everything was bright, organized, and clean. Then Luke saw the kid. A teenage boy came through a side door carrying a heavy bucket. He was thin, shoulders slightly hunched as if he was used to bracing for a shout. His skin was pale, his lips chapped, his brown hair messy and falling into his eyes. Dark circles sat beneath those eyes like bruises made by exhaustion. He looked about 17. He did not look like someone who felt safe here. The boy's gaze flicked to Luke, then away fast, like eye contact was dangerous. His hands tightened around the bucket handle until his knuckles went white. Trent's voice shifted, still polite, but sharper. "Evan, watch where you're going." The boy flinched. "Yes, sir." Luke felt something hard rise in him, not rage yet, something more controlled. A recognition. Trent was still smiling at Luke, still performing kindness, while the boy carried fear in his posture like a coat he could not take off. Ranger watched Evan, not with aggression, with focus. The way he watched Luke when Luke's pain spiked, Evan noticed Ranger's stare and swallowed. Luke spoke gently, aimed at Evan, not Trent. Heavy load. Evan's eyes lifted for a second. There was a flicker of something there. Shame, or relief, or both. "Yeah," Evan whispered. "It is." Trent stepped between them like it was nothing, like it was natural. "He's new, still learning. Don't mind him." Luke nodded, but his mind took notes. Evan, fearful, tired, the kind of kid who worked too hard for too little and got blamed anyway. Trent guided Luke through the facility, talking about training philosophy, safe handling, community outreach. Luke asked calm questions. He let Trent talk. People always revealed themselves if you gave them room. Ranger stayed quiet the whole time, but his body stayed angled toward the back areas. The place is not meant for tours. Luke did not push it today. He left with a brochure in his hand and a weight in his chest. Outside, snow tapped softly against his coat. The air smelled clean, but Luke's thoughts did not. In the truck, he sat without turning the key for a moment. His reflection stared back in the windshield. Square jaw, trimmed beard with gray at the temples, dark eyes that had once been softer. He thought of the puppies pressed together on Maya's heating pad. He thought of the mother dog's chain. He thought of Evan's flinch. People liked to believe evil looked obvious, like a monster, like a man screaming in the street. Luke knew better. Sometimes it looked like a polished sign and a friendly handshake. He started the engine. Ranger lifted his head and looked into the side mirror. Luke followed the gaze. A vehicle sat at the far edge of the lot. Engine running. Dark color. No headlights. Just waiting. Luke's stomach tightened. He did not panic. He did not speed off like prey. He drove out slowly. The way a man drove when he wanted the other driver to think he hadn't noticed. But his hands were steady on the wheel, and his mind was already mapping routes, turns, places to lose a tail if he had to. Ranger stayed upright, silent, watching the vehicle behind them. The storm had eased, but Luke felt the real weather changing, and this time, it was not coming from the sky. Snow hides, footsteps. By late afternoon, the sky lowered into a flat, steel lid. Snow returned in thicker waves, swallowing sound. The town looked softer, but Luke Harper felt the edge underneath everything. Luke parked outside the Flagstaff Police Department and sat still for one long breath. His navy winter coat was speckled with melting flakes. Under it, the red and black plaid flannel pressed warm against his chest. Faded jeans, brown low-cut boots, the same uniform he trusted when his thoughts got loud. Ranger waited beside him, calm and upright in the passenger seat. The German shepherd's black and tan coat looked almost painted in the gray light. Ears tall, amber-brown eyes watching the building as if it had a pulse. Service dog, Luke reminded himself, not because he forgot what Ranger was, but because it steadied him to say it plainly. Ranger was the one thing in his life that never pretended. Luke's left knee twinged when he stepped out. He ignored it and moved through the doors. The lobby smelled like wet wool and old coffee. A few people sat with hunched shoulders, hands wrapped around paper cups. A receptionist glanced up, then down. Practiced. Luke didn't like asking for help. He had spent years being trained to solve problems without it. But the chain in the woods, the drag mark, the two clean smiles at Mallory K9, and the car that had followed him out of the lot all pointed to something bigger than a lone decision. A woman came from a hallway and stopped when she saw Luke. Detective Jenna Morales looked like she belonged in winter. Mid-30s, medium height, lean and strong. Dark hair pulled back tight like she didn't have time for loose strands. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the way Luke's did, and her mouth held the kind of restraint that came from seeing too much. A faint scar cut near one eyebrow, a small reminder that her job did not forgive mistakes. She wore a plain dark jacket over practical clothes, boots built for walking on ice. Badge clipped at the belt, not dressed to impress, dressed to endure. Her gaze shifted to Ranger, then back to Luke. "You the guy the clinic called about," she said. Luke kept his voice steady. "I didn't ask them to call." Jenna's expression barely changed. "They call when they see a pattern." "Who are you?" "Luke Harper." He paused. "Former military." That earned him a longer look. Not admiration, not suspicion either, more like a measurement. Ranger stepped close to Luke's leg and sat, quiet. Jenna noticed that too. "Service dog," she said. Not as a question. Luke nodded once. Jenna gestured toward a small interview room. "Talk." Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed. Luke sat with his hands on the table, open, visible. Ranger lay down at his feet, eyes still on the door. Luke told her what he had seen. The puppies blocking the road, the fresh drag mark, the mother dog chained beneath a half-collapsed shelter, the truck passing with the logo on the side. Then Mallory K9 training in the daylight, all charity posters and certificates, and a teenager named Evan who moved like he expected pain. Jenna listened without interrupting. When Luke finished, she leaned back and exhaled. "Mallory," she said. "He's got donors. Photo ops. He's trained dogs for half the town." Luke met her eyes. "That doesn't mean he's clean." Jenna tapped a pen against the table. Slow. "It also doesn't mean he's dirty. I need proof that holds up, not instincts." Luke felt the familiar frustration rise. The old urge to act now, move hard, end it fast. That instinct had kept people alive once. It could also ruin everything here. He lowered his voice. I'm not asking you to raid him today. I'm asking you to look where nobody else looks. Jenna studied him. Her gaze flicked down to Ranger, then back up. What makes you so sure there's more? She asked. Quieter now. Luke thought of the puppies pressing into his coat like it was the only safe place left in the world. Because they didn't run, he said. They chose a truck to stop. That's not random. Jenna's face softened by a fraction. Then the professional mask settled back into place. Give me what you have, she said. Luke slid a small page across the table. A time, a location, the direction of the truck, what he remembered about the vehicle that followed him. Jenna took it, eyes scanning. You sure you weren't just spooking yourself? Luke's jaw tightened. No. Ranger's ears lifted, and Jenna paused. What? She asked. Luke didn't answer. He listened. Outside, in the hallway, a door opened fast. Footsteps, a voice, low and shaky. A teenage boy appeared in the lobby, shoulders hunched, cheeks red from cold. His hair was messy, falling into his eyes. His hands were bare, fingers raw like he'd been outside too long. Evan Price. Luke's chest tightened. The kid's gaze snapped to Luke, then to Jenna, and his face went pale like he hadn't expected both. Evan swallowed hard. I need to talk to someone, he whispered. Jenna stood, slow and controlled, like she didn't want to scare him off. I'm Detective Morales. Come here. Evan's eyes darted toward the door as if he expected it to explode open. He's moving them tonight, he said. When it storms, fewer people out. Jenna's stare sharpened. Who? Evan flinched. Trent. Mallory. Luke felt the room go very still inside him, like a soldier hearing the click of a safety coming off. Jenna's voice stayed calm. What do you mean by them? Evan's throat bobbed. Dogs. Puppies. Some are sick. Some are not. He keeps them where nobody sees. He says it's training. It's not. Luke looked down at Ranger. The dog's amber eyes held Luke's gaze like a steady hand. Luke understood the message without words. Do it right. Jenna moved faster now, but not sloppy. Evan, you're safe here. You tell me where. Evan gave a rough set of directions. Broken at first, then clearer as Jenna guided him with small questions. A back structure, a fenced section behind a secondary building, a door that stayed locked, a schedule that followed weather. Outside, the wind picked up, snow tapping the windows harder. Jenna glanced at Luke. You said you found a chained dog in the woods. Luke nodded. The same night. The truck passed close. Jenna's mouth tightened. Okay. She looked at Evan. We do this the legal way. I need enough to get a warrant. Evan's voice cracked. If you wait, he'll move them. Jenna held his gaze. Then we moved faster. Luke felt something shift in him. Not rage. Not vengeance. A cold clarity. The kind he had once used to plan missions that brought people home alive. He stood. His knee barked pain and he pushed through it. Tell me what you need from me. Jenna's eyes held his for a beat. Deciding, I need you to not play hero, she said. I need you to stay alive and keep that kid alive. Can you do that? Luke's voice came out low. Yes. Ranger rose at Luke's side, quiet and ready. Jenna opened the door and stepped into the hallway, already speaking into her radio. Voice clipped and precise. Evan hovered close, shaking like a leaf in a storm, but he didn't run. Luke watched him and felt the ache of a truth he didn't want. The boy wasn't just scared. He was guilty. Luke had seen that before too. People trapped in bad systems, convinced they were part of the damage forever. The snow outside thickened, the kind of snow that made the world disappear. Luke knew now that the storm was not the cover. It was the clock. And somewhere behind a clean sign and smiling photos, living creatures were waiting for someone to choose them. The storm's deadline. Night dropped fast, and the snow came sideways, thick as curtains. Streetlights dimmed into blurred coins of light. Wind pressed against doors like it wanted inside, and the town held its breath. Luke Harper waited near the edge of the lot, with his navy winter coat pulled tight over his red and black plaid flannel, faded jeans, brown low-cut boots, the same steady uniform, like armor made of ordinary cloth, His left knee throbbed under the cold, the old injury turning each step into a reminder. But he kept his weight controlled. Ranger stayed close at his heel. The German shepherd's black and tan coat vanished and reappeared under swirling snow. Ears upright, amber-brown eyes working constantly. Calm but watchful. Service dog. Luke thought again, not as a label, but as a promise. Ranger was trained to keep Luke anchored when the past tried to drag him under. Tonight, Ranger also kept Luke from becoming what he hated. Detective Jenna Morales approached with purposeful strides, her dark hair pulled back tight, her face set with that same quiet intensity Luke recognized in people who acted when others froze. She had a folder tucked under her arm, jacket dusted white. No showmanship. Just work, we got it, she said. Luke didn't ask what it meant. He saw it in her eyes. The warrant, the legal door that made this more than a suspicion. Jenna glanced at Evan Price, who stood half a step behind Luke's shoulder. The teen looked smaller at night, pale under the streetlight, messy brown hair falling into his eyes. His hands trembled, stuffed into the sleeves of a worn hoodie, as if the fabric could hide his fear. He wasn't brave in the loud way. He was brave in the way that hurt. Evan swallowed. He'll be watching, he said. I know, Jenna replied. Her voice stayed steady, the tone of someone who didn't waste fear. That's why we're moving now. Luke looked down at Ranger. Ranger's gaze flicked from Jenna to Evan to the darkness beyond the lot. Tracking movement, the way a compass tracks north. Luke's chest tightened. He remembered other nights, different uniforms, different kinds of storms where time was the enemy and hesitation cost lives. Back then, he had been trained to push down the part of him that felt. Tonight, it was the feeling that kept him moving. They drove in a small convoy, lights low, tires biting into fresh snow. Luke followed Jenna's lead, keeping a careful distance. Ranger sat upright, still and alert, reading the rhythm of the road. When they reached the outskirts of Mallory Canine Training, the facility looked almost peaceful. A tidy fence line, a bright sign, snow gathering like frosting along the roof edges. In the dim light, it could have been a postcard. Luke hated that thought. Jenna motioned them into position. Officers moved with quiet purpose, faces half hidden by scarves, boots crunching softly. Luke didn't need to know their names to recognize competence. They weren't eager. They weren't cruel. They were controlled. Evan hovered near Luke, breathing shallow. Luke leaned slightly toward him. Stay close, he said. Follow her instructions. Don't run. Evan nodded, jaw tight. I'm trying. Luke didn't say it's okay. It wasn't okay. But he said what mattered. Keep trying. Jenna raised a hand. The team moved. A knock. A pause. A louder knock. Then the door opened, and Trent Mallory appeared in the frame, like he'd stepped out of a brochure. He wore a clean jacket, hair neat, stubble perfect, that practiced smile already in place, but his eyes were cold, calculating, scanning faces for weakness. What's this about? Detective, Trent asked. Voice smooth. Jenna held up the warrant. Search. Now. Trent's smile twitched, then reset. This is a mistake. I've got records. Donations. You know what I do for this town. Luke watched Trent's gaze flick briefly to Evan, and Evan flinched like he'd been struck. Ranger shifted, silent, stepping closer to Luke's leg. Not aggressive, protective. Jenna didn't argue with Trent's performance. She stepped forward. Move. The officers entered in a measured sweep. Luke stayed with Evan at the edge, just behind Jenna's line, exactly where he was told to be. He felt the impulse to charge forward and tear the place apart with his bare hands. He didn't. That was the old Luke, the Luke built for war. This Luke had learned a harder kind of discipline. They moved down the hallway Ranger had watched before, past the certificates, past the smiling photos, past the donation box. Trent walked alongside, talking fast, throwing words like smoke. We're licensed. We train. We rehabilitate. People drop dogs off. Jenna cut him off. Open the back. Trent hesitated a fraction too long. Luke saw it. Jenna saw it. The lock clicked. The door opened. The cold that rolled out wasn't just winter air. It was the kind of cold that came from neglect. Inside, shapes shifted. Eyes caught the light. A hush. Then a low, frightened sound. Luke's throat tightened. He didn't move first. He waited for Jenna. He waited for the officers. He waited because the animals needed safety more than they needed Luke's anger. Maya Collins arrived moments later, cheeks flushed from the storm, hair still in that messy bun, freckles stark against pale skin. She carried supplies and wore the expression of someone who could be gentle and unbreakable at the same time. "Careful," she said to the officers. Voice firm. "They're scared. Fast hands will look like danger." Luke watched her step forward with calm confidence. The animals reacted to her the way drowning people react to a steady rope, still afraid. But reaching, Trent's mask cracked. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, irritation flashing through the charm. "You're going to regret this." Jenna's eyes didn't blink. "Not as much as you will." Evan stood rigid beside Luke, tears freezing on his lashes. "I didn't want it," he whispered, as if saying it out loud might change the past. Luke didn't shame him. He didn't comfort him with lies either. He just placed a gloved hand lightly on Evan's shoulder. "You're here now," Luke said. "That matters." Ranger stayed close, silent. His presence a quiet wall that kept Evan from collapsing. The rescue moved fast after that. Blankets, carriers, warmth. Maya's steady instructions. Officers turning gentler than they expected to be. And then, from the side room, Luke recognized a pair of small bodies wrapped together. The puppies. For a moment, Luke couldn't breathe. The storm outside roared, but inside his chest, something cracked open, the sharp fear of almost losing them, the fierce relief of seeing them alive. Maya looked at him, eyes tired but shining. "They're holding," she said. Luke nodded once, as if that was enough to keep him from breaking apart. Trent tried one last time, voice oily. "Detective, we can talk. I can make this go away." Jenna stepped closer, her voice low and final. "You're done." The cuffs clicked. Trent's eyes flicked to Luke, and in them Luke saw pure contempt. Not fear, contempt. Like he couldn't believe consequences had found him. Luke held the stare and felt something settle inside him, like a stone finally put down. Justice didn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrived like paperwork and winter boots, and people who refused to look away. Later, the storm eased into softer snow. Luke drove back toward the cabin with Ranger beside him, and one small bundle of warmth in a carrier on the seat. The other puppy had been placed with a local couple Maya trusted, older, gentle, ready to love. Luke didn't tell himself he was adopting a dog. He told himself he was giving a life a chance. But as the puppy made a small, sleepy sound and pressed closer to the heat, Luke felt his own chest loosen in a way it hadn't in years. Ranger glanced up at him. Ears relaxed at last, and Luke almost swore the dog looked pleased. "Don't start," Luke murmured, and a quiet laugh slipped out. Surprising him, outside, snow drifted down like a blessing that didn't ask permission. And for the first time in a long time, Luke let himself believe the world could still be made right, one small life at a time. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it shows up as two freezing puppies in the road. Right when a tired man is trying to get home, Luke could have driven past. Many people would have. But God often places a small life in our path to test what is still alive inside us. One kind choice became a chain of rescue, truth, and healing. The storm did not win because love refused to look away. In everyday life, it can be just as simple. A phone call you keep putting off, a neighbor you have not checked on, a stray animal you notice and help, a moment when you choose patience instead of anger. Those small choices can be the way God answers a prayer, for someone else and for you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Comment what you would have done in Luke's place, and subscribe for more stories like this. God bless you, and may the Lord watch over you and your family.